There are truths that only reveal themselves when everything we know falls apart. And now, Emily's world lay in fragments around her. She was a woman unraveling, stripped bare by the revelation that had slammed into her with the force of a freight train. She couldn't recognize her own son. 8 years later, the truth came out. The rain was a cold, unforgiving sheet, blurring the harsh fluorescent glow of the hospital's emergency entrance. Emily Carter stumbled, her knees giving out on the slick concrete, a guttural sob tearing from her throat, a sound raw and untamed. Her hands, usually steady and capable, now trembled, clawing at the wet air as if to grasp at something irrevocably lost, something just beyond the reach of her despair. The sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with the metallic tang of rain and her own salty tears, a sickening cocktail of fear and grief. She didn't even register the curious glances, the hurried whispers of passers-by, their fleeting judgments swallowed by the downpour. All that existed was the raw, unyielding agony that had taken root in her chest, a pain so profound it felt like her very bones were fracturing, splintering under an unbearable weight. "I saw him every day," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper that was instantly swallowed by the storm's fury. "Every single day and never knew." The words were a condemnation, a self-inflicted wound far deeper than any physical injury. They echoed in the hollow chambers of her heart, a brutal, unforgiving refrain that screamed of colossal failure. A truth, sharp and deadly as a surgeon's scalpel, had ripped through the carefully constructed piece of her life, tearing away the veil of comfortable ignorance she had worn for years. It was a truth that whispered of a past she desperately tried to bury, a life she'd convinced herself had vanished into the ether, leaving no trace. The universe, in its grim humor, had chosen this moment, this rain-slicked concrete, this desperate hospital entrance to deliver its crushing revelation. Her heart, once a meticulously guarded fortress, now lay exposed, bleeding under the cold, indifferent sky. 8 years earlier, the world had been a much colder, grayer place for a 20-year-old Emily, a realm of stark realities she had yet to truly comprehend. The small, isolated rural town she called home offered little comfort to a young woman adrift, cast out into a churning sea of judgment. Her parents, pillars of the community, strict and unyielding in their adherence to tradition, had disowned her the moment she confessed her pregnancy. Their farm, a century-old parcel of fertile land that should have been her birthright, became a monument to her ostracism. "You made your bed, Emily," her father had boomed, his face a mask of disappointment she'd never forgotten, a brand seared into her memory. "Now lie in it, far away from our name, far from this land that carries generations of honest work." Abandoned, with no savings, no support, and a hollow ache in her stomach that wasn't just hunger, she'd been forced to confront a reality starker than anything she could have imagined. Her boyfriend, the father, had vanished the moment the word, "baby," left her lips, a cowardly exit that left behind only the bitter taste of betrayal and the acrid stench of broken promises. She had been naive, full of the kind of foolish hope that only the young and desperate possess, a dangerous cocktail of innocence and yearning. She'd believed in love, in a future woven from sun-drenched dreams, only to find herself stranded on an island of her own making, surrounded by a churning sea of judgment and destitution. The shame was a suffocating blanket, heavy and suffocating. Every glance from a neighbor, every averted eye from an old friend, felt like a fresh wound, a cruel reminder of her fallen status. She was a pariah, a living testament to a mistake the town refused to forgive, a shadow haunting the edges of their carefully maintained civility. Emily found temporary shelter with an elderly aunt on the outskirts of town, a woman whose kindness was as worn as her threadbare curtains, a fragile solace in a hostile world. But even there, the walls felt thin, the whispers of local gossip penetrating like shards of glass, dissecting her life with cold precision. She worked odd jobs, her belly swelling, her body aching, her spirit shrinking under the crushing weight of her circumstances. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the gnawing fear that carved away at her soul, a relentless terror that gnawed at her waking and sleeping hours. How would she provide? How could she raise a child in a world that had cast her out, with no home, no income, no support? The question spun in her mind, a relentless, terrifying carousel, each rotation deepening her despair. The winter wind howled through the cracks in the old farmhouse, mirroring the tempest raging within her, a symphony of internal and external desolation. She would cradle her stomach, feeling the tiny flutters, the gentle kicks, and a fierce, primal love would bloom, only to be immediately choked by the thorny vines of despair. She wanted this child more than anything in the world, but wanting wasn't enough. Survival demanded a different kind of strength, a brutal pragmatism she hadn't known she possessed, a cold calculation against a world devoid of mercy. She pictured a tiny, helpless infant, cold and hungry, its future bleak, and the image twisted her insides, tearing at her resolve. The choices presented to her were few, and none were truly her own, each one a lesser evil. A child born into chaos, into a life of poverty and social ostracism, seemed a fate worse than separation, a slow, agonizing suffocation of spirit. It was a choice made out of fear, a primal, bone-deep terror of failing, of watching her child suffer. Not lack of love, never that. The love was a raging inferno, trapped behind bars of desperation. The day she left him was shrouded in a fog of unreality, each moment a step further into a self-imposed purgatory. The air was thick and humid, the kind that promised a summer storm that never quite broke, a suffocating tension mirroring her internal turmoil. Her son, Noah, was a year old, his eyes wide and curious, innocent pools reflecting a world Emily was about to tear from him. His tiny fingers clung to hers with a strength that belied his size, an anchor in the storm of her grief. He had inherited her hair, a rich, dark brown, and a smattering of freckles across his nose that were entirely his own, perfect constellations on a baby's face. She remembered the scent of him, baby powder and sunshine, and something uniquely Noah, a fragrance that would forever haunt her dreams. She remembered the weight of him in her arms, solid and warm, a perfect, trusting bundle of innocence, and her soul screamed in protest at the impending separation. The decision had been agonizing, a slow, torturous tearing of her soul, piece by agonizing piece. Her distant relatives, Miss Eleanor Vance and her husband, a couple from a neighboring county who had always seemed to exist on the fringes of her life, had offered to take him. They were older, childless, and seemingly stable, a beacon of hope in a darkening world. "Just until you get on your feet, Emily," her aunt had urged, her voice soft but insistent, a siren song of pragmatism. "It's what's best for him, for now." Emily had clung to that phrase like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. For now. She had convinced herself it was temporary, a bridge to a better future, a sacrifice that would ultimately lead to their reunion, a desperate lie to soothe her tormented conscience. The alternative, she believed with every fiber of her being, was a life of destitution for them both, a fate she could not bear to inflict upon her innocent child. The goodbye was a blur of unshed tears and forced smiles, a performance for the child who would not understand, a mask for the agony within. She pressed a hastily scribbled note into the pocket of his tiny overalls, a promise of return, a vow of unwavering love, a desperate plea to a future she hoped to reclaim. Her heart felt like a raw, exposed nerve, screaming in protest, but her face remained carefully composed, a stoic facade against a world that demanded her sacrifice. She walked away from that small, unassuming farmhouse, her arms feeling impossibly light. Bereft, the echo of his gurgling laughter a phantom sound in her ears, a constant reminder of what she had surrendered. The silence that followed was deafening, a void where his presence used to be, a barren landscape within her soul. For months, Emily worked tirelessly, cleaning houses, waiting tables, scrubbing away the grime of other people's lives while her own remained stained with loss, saving every penny, dreaming of the day she could send for him. She pictured his face, imagined his first words, his first steps, a future painted with vibrant colors of hope. She believed with a fervent, desperate hope that she was building a path back to him, brick by painful brick. But life, as it often does, moved forward with a cruel indifference. The relatives became less communicative, the visits more strained, the excuses more frequent, each interaction a further unraveling of her carefully constructed dream. Then devastatingly they moved, leaving no forwarding address, no trace, as if they had been swallowed whole by the earth itself. Her meager attempts to find them were met with blank stares and shrugged shoulders, a conspiracy of silence in the small, insular town. The wound never healed. It festered, a constant, dull ache beneath the surface of her carefully constructed new life, a persistent phantom pain. She moved to a slightly larger town, found stable work as a bookkeeper for a local agricultural supply cooperative, a world far removed from her parents' farm, yet subtly connected to the land she'd lost. She built a modest but secure existence, a fragile peace bought with relentless effort. She bought a small house, painted the walls a cheerful yellow, and filled it with quiet, unassuming comforts. But the yellow felt too bright sometimes, the quiet too loud, amplifying the void within. Every child she saw, every laugh she heard, every tiny hand clutching a parent's, was a fresh reminder of the ghost that haunted her. She lived an emotionally guarded life, a wall built around her heart, protecting it from the possibility of further pain and from the shame of her past. She told no one. The secret was a heavy stone in her stomach, a constant companion, her penance, a silent anchor dragging her down even as she strove for buoyancy. But even in this carefully curated solitude, a new desire, dormant for years, began to stir, a yearning to master the very systems that had once oppressed her. Years passed, blurring into the fabric of a predictable routine, each day a meticulous replica of the last. Emily, now 29, a seasoned bookkeeper at the struggling Farmer's Hand cooperative, drove through the heart of her rural town every workday morning and evening. Her route was etched into her memory. Past the old diner with its perpetually flickering neon sign, around the town square dominated by a statue of a forgotten war hero, and eventually to the main intersection before the highway. It was here at the junction of two-lane blacktop and ambition that she first saw him. A boy. He was thin, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with sun-bleached hair and a smudged face that spoke of long days spent outdoors, far from the comforts of home, a life lived under the open, indifferent sky. He stood on the corner, just beyond the faded yellow lines, holding a small cardboard sign that read, "Soda Water SNACKS." His eyes, a striking hazel, darted nervously but confidently between the passing cars, a practiced resilience in their depths, eyes that had seen too much for his tender years. Emily barely registered him at first. Just another young entrepreneur trying to make a few bucks in a town where opportunities were scarce, where the old ways were dying and new ones had yet to take root. But then, one sweltering Tuesday, her air conditioning decided to sputter and die, a minor inconvenience that would shatter her world. She rolled down her window, a wave of humid heat washing over her, and caught his gaze. He offered a shy, almost imperceptible smile, a flash of white against his tanned skin, a fleeting moment of connection. "Cold water, ma'am." His voice was clear, a little raspy, but held a surprising warmth, a note that resonated deep within her. Something stirred within Emily. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor, like a distant echo in a silent chamber, a memory teasing the edges of her consciousness. She bought a bottle of water, the condensation cool against her palm, a simple transaction imbued with an unseen weight. As she handed him the dollar, their fingers brushed. A fleeting spark, an odd sense of recognition, pricked at her, a jolt that went beyond mere coincidence. She dismissed it as a trick of the heat, a momentary lapse into sentimentality. She saw many children in her daily commute. This was just another one. Yet, something lingered, a persistent hum beneath the surface of her awareness. The next day, she slowed her car again. He was there unfailingly, a quiet sentinel against the backdrop of an indifferent world. He wore a different faded t-shirt, but his posture was the same, a mixture of hopeful patience and quiet determination. She found herself buying another bottle of water, then a bag of stale pretzels she didn't really want, making excuses to extend their brief connection. She started making excuses to stop, finding reasons to engage. He told her his name was Noah. The name struck her, a sharp, almost painful familiarity like a forgotten chord suddenly struck, but she pushed it down. Noah was a common name. She knew a dozen Noahs. This Noah, with his bright eyes and quick, practiced politeness, was just a friendly kid trying to make ends meet. He reminded her of a stray cat she'd once taken in, wary but open to kindness, fiercely independent but undeniably vulnerable, a spirit that tugged at something primal within her. She would ask him about his day, about school, though he was always vague, always deflecting, a wall of self-preservation around his young heart. He never complained, never asked for more than the price of his goods. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, a resilience that both impressed and saddened her. He was too young to carry such burdens, to wear the mantle of such responsibility. She felt drawn to him, a pull she couldn't articulate, a silent magnetism that defied logic, a gravitational force she could not escape. His voice, she noticed, had a particular timbre, a low resonance that resonated deep within her, a sound that stirred dormant memories. His eyes, those hazel eyes, held a depth that seemed far beyond his years, reflecting a wisdom born of hardship. She found herself studying them, searching for something she couldn't name, a phantom memory teasing at the edges of her consciousness, a truth struggling to surface. Time and poverty had certainly worked their cruel magic on him, hardening his features, etching lines of worry where childhood innocence should have been. But still, the familiarity persisted, an unspoken question hanging in the humid air between them, unrecognized, unheard, a seed waiting to bloom into revelation. Meanwhile, the economic winds were shifting, bringing with them the bitter scent of despair for the smaller, independent farmers of the region. From her vantage point at the Farmers' Hand cooperative, Emily saw the numbers, the grim reality. Loans were defaulting, land prices were plummeting, and a monolithic agribusiness conglomerate, Thorne Agri-Ventures, was slowly but aggressively buying up distressed properties. Its CEO, Silas Thorne, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded him like a dark storm cloud, was an unseen but palpable presence, a shadow stretching across the heartland. Thorne Agri-Ventures, with its sprawling operations and relentless pursuit of market dominance, was systematically dismantling the fabric of the local agricultural community, replacing generations of family farms with vast, impersonal corporate holdings. Emily watched, helpless as farmers she knew, families with deep roots in the soil, were forced to sell, their legacies erased with the stroke of a pen. She saw the same despair in their eyes that she had once felt, the same crushing weight of financial chains. A quiet rage began to simmer within her, a determination to understand the system, to find a way to fight back against the very forces that had once left her destitute. She pored over ledgers, analyzed market trends, seeking a weakness, a loophole, any crack in Thorne's armor. This silent fight for the community began to intertwine with her unspoken connection to Noah, a growing, primal desire to protect the vulnerable, to ensure no child like him would ever face such a harsh, unforgiving reality. The silent bond deepened, woven from small gestures and unspoken understandings that transcended the simple exchange of money for goods. Emily found herself altering her schedule slightly, ensuring she passed Noah's intersection during his prime selling hours, a ritual she now unconsciously sought. She kept a steady supply of small bills in her console, not just for convenience but as a deliberate act, a quiet offering. It wasn't about the water or the snacks anymore. It was about the moment, the brief connection, the shared humanity in a world that often felt devoid of it. She would buy things she didn't need, sometimes even a second bottle of water she knew she wouldn't drink, just to give him a few extra dollars, to see that small, grateful nod, a flicker of light in his weary eyes. She never made a show of it, never offered pity, guarding his pride as fiercely as her own. She simply bought, and he simply sold, a transaction imbued with a silent, maternal care she couldn't explain, a burgeoning instinct she barely recognized. "Hot one today, Noah," she'd say, handing him a $5 bill for a single soda. "Keep the change." His eyes would widen for a fraction of a second, a flash of surprise quickly replaced by a polite, "Thank you, ma'am. You have a good day," his dignity unwavering. He never refused the extra money, but he never asked for it either. His pride was a quiet, unyielding force, a testament to his resilient spirit. One crisp autumn morning, she noticed he was shivering, despite the worn, oversized jacket he wore, his small frame trembling against the biting wind. The next day, she discreetly left a new, thick flannel shirt on the passenger seat, offering it to him as if it were an afterthought, a casual gesture to mask her profound concern. "My nephew outgrew this," she lied smoothly, the words catching in her throat, a small deceit for a larger truth. "Thought you might get some use out of it." He looked at the shirt, then at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his hazel eyes' suspicion. Gratitude, a weary acceptance, a complexity that spoke of a childhood too quickly lost. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than usual, a rare vulnerability. He took the shirt, holding it carefully, and for a moment the barrier between them seemed to thin, almost to vanish, a silent communion. She often found herself thinking about him throughout her day, a protective instinct blooming fiercely in her chest, an ancient echo stirring. She wondered where he lived, who he lived with, why he was out here day after day instead of in school. She knew deep down that his life was hard, written in the weariness around his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands when he counted change, the way he flinched sometimes at sudden loud noises, like a wild creature wary of danger. She wanted to ask, to help in a more substantial way, but a fear held her back. A fear of overstepping, of prying, of revealing too much of herself, and perhaps of forcing him to reveal a vulnerability he worked so hard to conceal. She felt maternal towards him, an overwhelming urge to shield him, to nurture him, to provide a warmth and stability she sensed he lacked. It was a feeling that resonated with an ancient, half-forgotten echo within her, a ghost of a love she had once known, a bond she had once severed. It was a pull she mistook for general human compassion, an anonymous empathy for a struggling child. She convinced herself it was simply the residual guilt of her past, manifesting as a desire to help any child in need. She bought from him often, her car a familiar sight at the intersection. She helped him quietly, never questioning, never demanding. She felt maternal without knowing why, a silent, unrecognized thread binding their separate, solitary lives together, a thread that was about to pull taut, revealing a devastating truth. Then one Tuesday, the corner was empty. The usual spot where Noah set up his makeshift stand was bare, an unnerving void. Emily slowed her car, her heart giving an uncomfortable lurch, a premonition of dread. This wasn't like him. Noah was a constant, a fixture in her daily routine, a quiet reassurance. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She told herself he was sick or perhaps had a day off, a rare luxury for a child like him. But the feeling of unease persisted, growing steadily throughout her workday, a dark cloud gathering. By Wednesday, the anxiety was a gnawing beast in her gut, its claws tearing at her composure. The corner remained empty. On Thursday, a desperation began to set in, a frantic energy she couldn't suppress. She pulled over, something she had never dared to do before, breaking her carefully maintained distance, and approached a couple of younger kids who sometimes loitered near the gas station across the street. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice tight, barely controlled. "Do you know where the boy who sells water usually is?" "Noah." The kids, scrawny and wary, exchanged a glance, their eyes holding a secret. One, a girl with braids, shrugged. Haven't seen him in a couple days. The other, a boy with a scraped knee, spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper, chilling her to the bone. He got hit by a car, ma'am, down near Blackwood Farm. The word struck Emily like a physical blow, a sudden, brutal impact. The world tilted, threatening to swallow her whole. The familiar sense of gasoline and exhaust suddenly turned acrid, stinging her nostrils, making her gasp for air. Hit by a car. Her voice was barely a gasp, a whisper of horror. When? Where is he? The boy pointed vaguely down a side street towards the older, run-down part of town, a labyrinth of decaying houses and cracked pavement. Over there, I think. Heard he's bad. Near the old Blackwood place. Blackwood Farm. The name resonated with a strange, dark familiarity. It was the struggling 100-year-old farm the Farmers' Hand Cooperative had been trying to help, a place Silas Thorne was actively trying to acquire for pennies on the dollar. The weight of that name, that place, suddenly amplified her fear for Noah. Emily didn't wait for more details. Her mind reeled, a chaotic storm of fear and a horrifying sense of premonition. The quiet, almost paternal affection she'd felt for the boy suddenly surged into something fierce, something primal, obliterating all reason. This wasn't just a boy she knew. This was something more. She jumped back into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white, her muscles rigid with urgency. Her foot pressed down on the accelerator, her tires squealing as she turned off the main road, leaving her usual route behind, plunging into the unknown. The paved road quickly gave way to uneven asphalt, then to gravel, then to pothole-riddled dirt tracks. The houses here were different, smaller, shabbier, their paint peeling, their yards overgrown with weeds, a testament to neglect and forgotten lives. There was an oppressive quiet to the neighborhood, a heavy blanket of forgotten hopes and struggles, a quiet desperation that clawed at her soul. Her mind raced, a cacophony of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was he okay? Was he alone? The fear for him was overwhelming, eclipsing everything else, a torrent of pure, unadulterated dread. She didn't question why she was doing this, why this particular child's disappearance had shaken her to her core. All she knew was that she had to find him. The anxiety was a cold, sharp blade twisting in her stomach, a constant, agonizing torment. He was gone, vanished from his corner, and the world felt utterly, terrifyingly wrong, a cruel, mocking void. Emily followed the directions, her car bumping violently over the cracked pavement, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, a grim symphony of neglect. The houses grew closer together, their windows dark, like vacant eyes staring out into a desolate landscape. This was a neighborhood the town forgot, a pocket of hardship unseen by those on the main roads, ignored by the affluent and preyed upon by those like Silas Thorne. She spotted a small gathering of children outside a particularly dilapidated house, their faces solemn, their usual boisterous energy subdued, replaced by a quiet, shared grief. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This had to be it. She pulled her car to the curb, the crunch of gravel impossibly loud in the silence, announcing her desperate arrival. As she stepped out, a woman emerged from the house, her face etched with worry, her hands clasped tightly at her chest, a silent prayer on her lips. She was elderly, her hair a wispy white braid, her skin a network of sun-baked wrinkles, a face that spoke of a lifetime of quiet struggle. Her eyes, though clouded with age and sadness, held a familiar glint, a ghost of a memory Emily couldn't quite grasp, a recognition stirring in the depths of her soul. "Is this where Noah lives?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse, barely audible, choked by the rising tide of dread. The old woman looked at her, her gaze piercing, unwavering, seeing straight through to Emily's tormented heart. A slow, agonizing recognition began to dawn on Emily, a horrifying realization. The set of the woman's jaw, the slight tremor in her hands, the faded floral dress that seemed so familiar, like a ghost from a past she had tried to bury. It was Miss Eleanor Vance, the distant relative, the woman she had left Noah with all those years ago. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken truths, a crushing weight of history. 8 years vanished in an instant, replaced by a torrent of raw, overwhelming memories, a flood that threatened to drown her. Miss Vance's eyes, full of a deep, complicated sorrow, moved from Emily's face to the ambulance lights flashing a few streets over, then back again. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a weary resignation, as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the past to finally catch up, to exact its cruel toll. Emily's breath hitched. A cold dread, far deeper than the fear for Noah's immediate safety, began to seep into her bones, chilling her to the marrow. She suddenly understood with a horrifying clarity why she had been drawn to the boy at the intersection, why his eyes, his voice had resonated so profoundly. It wasn't just a familiar feeling, it was the echo of a forgotten truth, a bloodline calling out across the years. The truth, like a poisonous vine, began to surface, twining around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs, threatening to suffocate her. She looked at Miss Vance, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out, only a silent scream. The elderly woman simply nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek, a testament to shared sorrow and unburdened secrets. The recognition was a punch to the gut, a dizzying spiral into a past she had tried so desperately to outrun, a past that had now caught her, binding her in its cruel embrace. The truth was no longer buried. It had broken free, and it was screaming, demanding its due. The words fell like thunder, shattering the fragile peace Emily had built around herself, splintering her carefully constructed world into irreparable shards. "He's your son, Emily." Miss Vance's voice was a low murmur, barely audible over the distant wail of sirens, yet it reverberated through Emily's entire being, shaking her to her core, rattling the very foundations of her soul. 8 years collapsed into one brutal, unforgiving moment, a devastating convergence of past and present. The world spun. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, threatening to give way, to open up and swallow her whole. The dilapidated house, the worn faces of the children, the oppressive heat, all receded into a blurry, indistinct backdrop. Only Miss Vance's eyes remained, holding hers, reflecting a shared sorrow, a silent accusation, a knowing indictment. Emily staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream that tore at her throat, a primal sound of agony. "No," she whispered, a desperate, futile denial, a plea against the inevitable. "No, it can't be." But even as the word left her lips, she knew it was true. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with a sickening thud, a brutal, undeniable logic. The familiar tug, the unspoken bond, the hazel eyes that had haunted her from the intersection, all of it now made terrifying, heartbreaking sense. She had seen him every day. She had spoken to him, bought from him, felt a maternal pull toward him, a connection she had deliberately ignored. Her own son. And she hadn't known. The weight of it, the unimaginable irony, was crushing, a colossal burden that threatened to suffocate her. Shame, guilt, and a profound, bone-deep grief washed over her, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, pulling her down into an abyss of self-loathing. How could she have been so blind? So utterly, terribly blind? Miss Vance stepped closer, her hand reaching out, hesitant, then resting gently on Emily's arm, a gesture of both comfort and condemnation. "We tried, Emily," she said, her voice laced with a raw weariness, a lifetime of burdens. "We tried to find you after things got hard for us. My husband, bless his soul, got sick, and the bills, they piled up. We had to move to a smaller place closer to the clinic. But you'd moved too. And Noah, he's a good boy. Always has been. He took care of himself, Emily. He always did." The words twisted the knife, turning it deeper. Noah took care of himself. Her son, just a boy, forced into hardship, selling trinkets at an intersection because his mother had abandoned him, and the relatives who took him in had also eventually faltered under the relentless pressure of poverty and illness. The full scope of her failure, her monumental mistake, lay exposed, raw and bleeding under the merciless sun. Emily's knees buckled. She sank to the cracked sidewalk, burying her face in her hands, racked by a silent, guttural sob that tore through her body, ripping her apart from the inside. The air tasted of ash, her own tears bitter on her lips, a sacrament of regret. A lifetime of regret, of repressed grief, of carefully constructed emotional walls crumbled around her, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. This wasn't just a boy in an accident. This was her flesh and blood, a consequence of her past, now bleeding and fighting for his life, a direct result of the choices she'd made, the life she'd left him to navigate alone. Emily broke, not just her composure, but something deeper, something fundamental within her. The carefully maintained facade of her stable, emotionally guarded life shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The world was no longer cold and gray. It was a kaleidoscope of searing pain and blinding truth, a brutal, undeniable reality she could no longer escape. She had lost him once to fear. She would not lose him again to fate. The hospital waiting room was a sterile, unforgiving space, filled with the hushed murmurs of anxious families and the intermittent beeps and whirs of medical machinery, each sound amplifying Emily's agony. Emily sat rigidly in a hard plastic chair, the scent of antiseptic permeating everything, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death. Miss Vance, frail and weary, sat beside her, occasionally patting her hand, offering quiet words of comfort that Emily barely registered, her mind a maelstrom of fear and guilt. All that mattered was the closed door to the emergency room, the impenetrable barrier between her and her son, a door that held her fate hostage. Hours stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to her soul. The doctors offered grim updates, their words clinical and detached. Head trauma, internal bleeding, critical but stable. Each pronouncement was a fresh stab to Emily's heart, a cruel reminder of her son's precarious existence. She pictured Noah, the resilient boy at the intersection, his shy smile, his independent spirit, now lying helpless, broken, a fragile vessel. It was an unbearable image, one that seared itself into her mind. Guilt, a venomous serpent, coiled tightly in her gut, tightening with every agonizing minute, its fangs sinking deeper into her conscience. Her choice, her abandonment, had led him here. She had pushed him into a life of vulnerability, a life where a single wrong step, a single distracted driver could erase him from existence. When they finally allowed her to see him, it was like walking into a nightmare, a descent into her deepest fears. He lay motionless, pale and still against the stark white sheets, tubes and wires a grotesque extension of his young body, a cruel caricature of life. A bandage was wrapped tightly around his head, stark against his dark hair, a stark white testament to his injuries. The familiar hazel eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and uneven, each breath a delicate struggle. Emily reached out, her hand trembling, and gently touched his bruised forehead. His skin was cool beneath her fingertips, a stark contrast to the burning inferno within her. A wave of overwhelming love, pure and fierce and unapologetic, washed over her, obliterating everything else, every doubt, every fear, every shadow of regret. This was her son, her Noah, the boy she had carried, the child she had loved, the life she had given up. And now she wouldn't leave him, not again. She pulled a chair close to his bedside, her gaze never leaving his face, her eyes consuming every detail, every nuance of his fragile existence. The long hours of the night bled into the harsh light of dawn, painting the room in shades of gray. She watched him, listening to the rhythmic hum of the machines, clinging to every shallow breath, every flicker of movement, as if her very will could infuse him with life. She talked to him, whispering stories of her day, memories of his infancy she had hoarded like precious jewels, confessions of her unwavering love, her agonizing regret, a torrent of words pouring from her soul. She poured out her heart, a desperate, silent plea for him to fight, to come back to her, to give her a chance to make amends. "I'm here, Noah," she whispered, her voice raw with unshed tears, thick with desperation. "I'm right here." I'm so sorry, so sorry." The confession was a torrent, a release of 8 years of silent suffering, a dam finally breaking. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. I made a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. But I'm going to fix it. I promise." She spoke of the desperation, the fear, the impossible choices, trying to articulate the crushing circumstances that had driven her, seeking absolution in the quiet of the room. She spoke of how she had searched, how she had grieved, how she had carried the weight of him in her heart for all these years, a secret burden. It was a confession meant more for herself, a desperate atonement, than for the unconscious boy beside her. Days blurred into a week. Emily didn't leave his side, barely eating, sleeping only in fitful bursts in the uncomfortable chair, her body a mere vessel for her unwavering vigil. Miss Vance brought her food, fresh clothes, but Emily's focus remained solely on Noah, a laser-like intensity. It was a vigil, a penance, a fierce act of love, a desperate prayer. She traced the lines of his small, bruised hand, memorizing every contour, every crease, every mark. His life, his fragile existence, was the only thing that mattered. She felt the heavy burden of her past lifting, replaced by the crushing, yet liberating, weight of the present, a new purpose taking root. This was her chance, her only chance to make things right. When he finally stirred, a soft groan escaping his lips, Emily's heart leaped, soaring with a desperate hope. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened, revealing those familiar hazel eyes, clouded with confusion and pain. "Noah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, a fragile bridge between their broken pasts. He blinked, his gaze unfocused, then slowly, painstakingly settled on her face. A flicker of recognition, faint but undeniable, sparked in their depths. "Ma'am," he croaked, his voice weak, but undeniably his asterisk, a sound that brought tears to Emily's eyes. Emily leaned in, tears streaming down her face, a radiant, tremulous smile breaking through her anguish. "It's Emily," she said, her voice barely above a sob. I'm your mother, Noah." The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence, yet filled with an overwhelming, desperate hope. Life or death. And Emily was choosing life, choosing him, confessing the truth when he woke, ready to face whatever came next, a challenge she would meet with unwavering resolve. The weeks that followed were a testament to Noah's astonishing resilience and Emily's unwavering commitment, a fragile dance of healing and hope. His recovery was slow, fraught with setbacks and pain, each day a new battle, but he was a fighter, tempered by years of hardship. He had survived the accident, just as he had survived years of hardship, his spirit unbent, though clearly scarred, a testament to his indomitable will. The initial shock of Emily's revelation had been overwhelming for him. He'd stared at her with a mix of disbelief, anger, and a heartbreaking curiosity, a whirlwind of emotions in his young eyes. He remembered fragments of a childhood before Miss Vance, fleeting images of a younger woman, a soft voice, a feeling of warmth, a primal comfort. But time and the brutal reality of his life had blurred those memories into near oblivion, cruel mists obscuring his earliest days. Emily spent hours talking to him, explaining, confessing everything without holding back, laying bare the raw, painful truth of her past. She spoke of her youth, her parents' abandonment, the crushing poverty, the fear that had driven her impossible choice, the desperate calculus of a mother's love. She detailed her relentless, futile search for him after Miss Vance had moved, her desperate attempts to bridge the chasm. She laid bare her shame, her regret, her enduring love, a raw, unflinching honesty. She didn't expect forgiveness immediately, or even understanding, knowing such things could not be rushed. She only offered the truth, raw and unvarnished, and her unconditional presence, a steadfast anchor in his tumultuous world. "I know I don't deserve it, Noah," she'd said one afternoon, holding his hand, her voice thick with emotion, trembling with her heartfelt plea. "But I want to be your mother now. I want to make up for every lost moment, if you'll let me." He listened, his hazel eyes studying her, a complex mix of emotions playing across his young face, a silent war raging within him. Sometimes he would pull his hand away, a flash of old hurt in his eyes, a wound still fresh. Other times he would simply rest his gaze on her, a silent question, a tentative reach. Gradually, painstakingly, a fragile bridge began to form between them, built on trust and vulnerable honesty. Emily brought him books, read to him, told him stories of the outside world he had only ever seen from the vantage point of his street corner, expanding his horizons. She learned about his life with Miss Vance, the small joys, the constant struggles, the street-smart lessons he'd picked up to survive, the brutal education of the forgotten. She watched him eat, carefully preparing meals, ensuring he never went hungry again, banishing the specter of scarcity. She noticed how he still hoarded small items, a habit born of scarcity, and gently reassured him that he wouldn't need to do that anymore, that a new abundance awaited him. Miss Vance, a quiet observer, offered her own insights, softening the edges of the past. "She truly loved you, Noah," she told him one evening, her voice gentle, a voice of wisdom. "She always did. Her choice came from a desperate place." The elderly woman, though weakened by age, also found a measure of peace in their reunion. She had carried the burden of Noah's history, and now it was shared, a collective sigh of relief. As Noah's physical strength returned, so did a cautious openness in his heart. He started asking Emily questions about herself, about the house she lived in, about the life she had built, tentative explorations of their shared future. He allowed her to brush his hair, to adjust his pillow, to simply be near him, small acts of acceptance that meant the world. The silent bond that had formed between them at the intersection now had a name: mother and son. One sunny afternoon, as he sat in a wheelchair by the hospital window, gazing at the distant, familiar streets, he turned to Emily. "You really looked for me?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant, a question laden with years of unspoken longing. Emily's eyes welled up. "Every single day, Noah," she promised, her voice unwavering, a vow etched in her soul, "until I found you again." He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't full forgiveness, not yet, but it was acceptance. It was a step, a monumental step towards healing. Emily chose him. Openly, finally. She arranged for his discharge, navigating the paperwork, cutting through the red tape, all with a newfound fierce resolve that would define her path forward. She brought him to her home, the small house with the cheerful yellow walls, and began the slow, tender process of building a new life, a true life together. She enrolled him in school, bought him new clothes, new books, patiently teaching him the rhythm of a stable, secure existence. She wasn't just his mother. She was his anchor, his advocate, his unwavering presence, a force of nature unleashed. The pain of the past would always be a part of their story, a jagged scar that would never fully fade. But it was a scar that bound them, a testament to what they had lost and what they had found again. Emily had finally reclaimed her son, and in doing so had reclaimed a lost piece of herself. Their journey of healing had just begun, but the path was now clear, illuminated by a love that had defied time, hardship, and the cruelest of ironies, a love that would forge a new destiny. The fierce maternal resolve that had driven Emily through Noah's recovery didn't fade. Instead, it sharpened, hardening into an unyielding determination to not only protect her son, but to forge a new future, one where neither of them would ever again be victims of circumstance or the machinations of powerful men. Her old job as a bookkeeper for the Farmer's Hand Cooperative suddenly felt too small, too passive. She saw the struggling farms, the mounting debts, the pervasive fear of Silas Thorne and his relentless acquisitions, and a radical idea began to take root in her mind. She understood the numbers, the subtle shifts in the market, the vulnerabilities Thorne exploited. What if she could use that knowledge, not just to balance ledgers, but to turn the tide? Emily immersed herself in agricultural economics, devouring books and online courses late into the night, after Noah was asleep. She learned about sustainable farming practices, niche crop markets, and alternative financing models that could circumvent the traditional banks Thorne manipulated. Her innovation wasn't a single invention, but a synthesis of overlooked solutions, a cooperative model that leveraged collective buying power and shared resources, combined with a direct-to-consumer digital platform that cut out predatory middlemen. She called it Veridian Futures, a symbol of green growth and a defiant promise. Her first target was the Blackwood Farm, the very place Noah had been injured. It was a sprawling, century-old property, steeped in history but crumbling under the weight of an insurmountable mortgage, precisely the kind of distressed asset Thorne Agri-Ventures coveted. Its current owner, an aging, stoic farmer named Josiah Blackwood, was on the brink of foreclosure. Emily spent weeks meticulously analyzing his books, identifying inefficiencies, and then, boldly, she presented him with her proposal. Veridian Futures would buy Blackwood Farm's debt, restructure its operations for sustainable, high-yield heirloom crop production, and market its produce directly to high-end restaurants and online subscribers. In return, Josiah would receive a fair share of the profits and retain a symbolic ownership stake, keeping the legacy alive. Josiah, cynical and weary, initially scoffed at the idea, a young woman talking about digital platforms and heirloom crops. But Emily's fierce conviction, her meticulous projections, and a desperate hope for his family's legacy chipped away at his skepticism. More importantly, she offered him a way to save his family's history, a deep-seated emotional appeal. He agreed, a handshake sealing their audacious gamble. This move didn't go unnoticed. Silas Thorne, a man who saw any competition as an affront, caught wind of Veridian Futures' acquisition of Blackwood Farm. Thorne Agri-Ventures had been planning to acquire Blackwood for months, waiting for Josiah to finally capitulate. Emily's intervention was a direct challenge, a tiny thorn in his side. He dispatched his legal team, initially with nuisance lawsuits, citing arcane zoning laws and environmental regulations, attempting to choke Veridian Futures in its infancy. But Emily, armed with her meticulous research and a burgeoning network of sympathetic local attorneys, fought back, turning Thorne's own tactics against him, exposing the cracks in his legal armor. Her innovation was not just agricultural, it was legal and financial, a mastery of the system. The stakes were no longer just personal, they were communal. The heartland, she realized, was her new battlefield, and she, a former pariah, was now a reluctant general. Her bold venture began to gain traction, but it also drew the unwanted attention of powerful forces who saw her as a threat to their established order. The whispers of the community turned from gossip to grudging admiration, then to cautious hope. Emily, a woman scorned, was quietly building an empire from the very ground her ancestors had worked, a new kind of legacy forged in defiance. Emily's new venture, Veridian Futures, expanded with a speed that startled even her. The heirloom crops from Blackwood Farm, marketed through her innovative online platform, found an eager market in metropolitan areas, fetching premium prices. The success wasn't just financial. It was a powerful narrative of resilience, community, and sustainable agriculture, drawing other struggling local farmers into the Veridian Futures cooperative. She secured more properties, not through predatory acquisition, but by buying out the crushing debts of desperate families, offering them a share in the cooperative, a genuine stake in a shared future. The quantifiable escalation was undeniable. Revenue soared, new jobs were created, and the dilapidated farms she acquired bloomed with renewed purpose, their fields vibrant with specialized, organic produce. Veridian Futures became a beacon of hope, a defiant green against the encroaching gray of corporate farming. Silas Thorne, however, was not a man to be easily thwarted. He viewed Emily's success as a personal insult, a direct challenge to his dominion. His initial legal skirmishes had failed, only fueling his resolve. He launched a multi-pronged attack. First, he attempted to undercut Veridian Futures market, flooding the local and regional markets with cheap, mass-produced versions of similar crops, artificially driving down prices. Emily countered by leaning into her brand story, the quality, the ethics, the local support, and diversifying her product line to include artisanal goods and specialty processed foods, making her immune to direct price wars. Next, Thorne tried to disrupt her supply chain. He bought up local distributors, attempting to squeeze Veridian futures out of shipping channels. But Emily, anticipating such a move, had already invested in a small fleet of refrigerated trucks and established direct relationships with her restaurant clients, creating her own independent distribution network. Her mastery of the system was growing, turning his tactics into her opportunities. Then came the true crisis. Thorne, leveraging his deep connections with regional banks, orchestrated a financial chokehold. Loans for Veridian futures expansion were suddenly called in, lines of credit mysteriously frozen, and even the small, local bank Emily had cultivated a relationship with felt the pressure. A crucial payment on the Blackwood farm debt, the one she had painstakingly restructured, was due in 3 weeks. If she missed it, Thorne, through a shell company, would swoop in, seize the farm, and dismantle everything she had built. It was a real risk of financial ruin, a threat to the very legacy she was trying to save, and a direct assault on her newfound stability with Noah. Emily felt the crushing weight of it all, the immense pressure of Silas Thorne's influence. The conspiracy was palpable, an invisible hand trying to crush her. She knew this wasn't just about money, it was about power, about Thorne sending a message to anyone who dared defy him. She stood on the brink of an impossible choice: capitulate and lose everything, or gamble with the fragile future she had built for Noah and the community. She confided in Noah, explaining the complexity of the fight, not to burden him, but to share her truth. His eyes, now full of a youthful understanding that transcended his years, met hers with unwavering trust. "We'll figure it out, Mom," he said, his voice firm, a quiet strength she leaned on. The night before the decisive confrontation, Emily stood alone on the porch of her small yellow house, the weight of her entire future, and Noah's, resting on a single, desperate gamble. She had found a loophole, a legal technicality buried deep in the original land deeds of Blackwood Farm, a clause that could either save them or drag them into an even deeper legal abyss. It was a high-stakes play, one that required courage, cunning, and an unshakable belief in the righteous defiance of the underdog. The fate of Veridian futures, the legacy of Blackwood Farm, and the future she had so painstakingly built with Noah, hung precariously in the balance. "I came here today," Emily continued, her voice powerful now, carrying the weight of her victories, "not for your blessing or your forgiveness. I came here to tell you that I found my son. I lost him once because of fear, because of the circumstances you contributed to, but I found him again, and I will never let him go." Her father stared at her, his face a mixture of rage and bewilderment, the collapse of his own rigid world. He had expected weakness, tears, perhaps a plea for acceptance. Instead, he found a woman transformed, unbowed, wielding financial and social power he could no longer dismiss. His system of judgment, his ingrained ideology of shame, was impotent against the force of her newfound strength. Her mother, usually so subservient to her husband, remained silent, her eyes darting between Emily, Noah, and her husband, a flicker of something almost akin to awe, or perhaps regret in her gaze. Emily looked at her father one last time, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I chose my own destiny," she stated, the words a quiet declaration of war against the old values that had nearly destroyed her. "And my son is a part of it. Veridian Futures represents the true future of this land, a future you tried to cast away." She turned, tugging Noah gently. As they walked back to her car, leaving her parents frozen in their perfect, sterile yard, Emily felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The stone in her stomach, the weight of her secret, was gone. She was empowered, the master of her own system, her own family, her own agricultural empire. Her past was acknowledged, her present reclaimed, and her future with Noah by her side was finally truly hers. It was a victory not just of wealth or status, but of love, resilience, and an unwavering maternal bond, rooted in the very soil she had been disowned from. Blood doesn't forget. It waits until the truth is ready. Months bloomed into a year, then 2, then 3, each passing season painting the landscape with the vibrant proof of Veridian future's triumph. The yellow house, once a quiet sanctuary for Emily's solitary life, now vibrated with the energy of a growing boy, Noah's laughter a constant melody. Noah, once the wary, independent street vendor, had transformed. The lines of hardship had softened around his eyes, replaced by the light of youthful curiosity and burgeoning confidence. He excelled in school, his sharp mind devouring knowledge, his resilience finding a new outlet in learning and competitive debate. He played on the local baseball team, his lean frame gaining strength, his laughter echoing across the fields. Emily watched him, a quiet joy blooming in her heart with every milestone, a profound gratitude erasing the sting of past guilt. She was here now. She was his mother openly and completely, her love a fierce, unwavering shield. Their bond, once a silent, unrecognized thread, was now a tapestry woven with shared moments, gentle conversations, and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. Noah, now an earnest and perceptive teenager, often joined Emily at Veridian Futures, showing a keen interest in the sustainable practices and community initiatives that had become their legacy. He was learning not just about agriculture, but about justice, about fighting for what was right against overwhelming odds, lessons his mother embodied. Silas Thorne's empire, once seemingly invincible, had fractured under the weight of the legal challenges and public scrutiny Emily had unleashed. The injunction had sparked a cascade of investigations into his monopolistic practices, and the once surrogate gatekeeper was now mired in lawsuits, his reputation shattered, his fortunes significantly diminished. His defeat was a symmetrical catharsis, poetic justice delivered through the very financial and legal systems he had manipulated. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily took Noah back to the old, run-down neighborhood where he had lived with Miss Vance. Miss Vance, her health declining, had moved to a small, comfortable assisted living facility Emily had arranged, a place where she could live out her days in dignity. The house where Noah had lived stood empty now, its windows boarded up, a ghost of its former self, a silent monument to a past endured. Noah stood silently, gazing at the dilapidated structure, his hands in his pockets, a thoughtful introspection on his face. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, a nostalgic chill. "Hard to believe I lived here," he said, his voice thoughtful, tinged with a quiet acceptance. "It feels like a lifetime ago, a different life." Emily put an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "It was a tough life, Noah," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and pride. "You were so strong even then, stronger than anyone I knew." He leaned into her embrace, a comfortable, natural gesture that still brought a lump to Emily's throat, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. "I remember the corner," he continued, a faint smile touching his lips, "and the lady who always bought water. She was always so kind." Emily's heart ached with the bittersweet irony, a silent acknowledgement of the past. "She really was, wasn't she?" she whispered, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "She missed you every day you weren't there. She was building a future, a way to make sure no child ever had to stand on a corner like that again." He looked up at her, his hazel eyes so like her own, filled with a depth of understanding that went beyond his years. "I know," he said simply. "I know now." It was a quiet moment, a silent acknowledgement of the pain, the separation, and the ultimate reunion. He didn't need to say more. The healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it, understanding it, and allowing it to strengthen the present, to build a future rooted in resilience. Emily had built Veridian Futures into a thriving beacon of ethical agriculture, a sprawling cooperative that supported hundreds of small farmers and championed sustainable practices. The Blackwood farm, once nearly lost, now flourished as a model of innovation and community spirit. Its 100-year-old legacy not just saved, but reborn, a testament to her vision. She was a leader, a master of the system, using her newfound financial and social power to uplift, not oppress. The climactic confrontation was not in a dusty courtroom, but in the polished, predatory theater of a regional banking consortium's annual meeting, where Silas Thorne held sway. Emily, impeccably dressed but radiating a quiet, dangerous resolve, walked in uninvited, a calculated disruption. She wasn't just representing Veridian futures. She represented every small farmer, every forgotten legacy, every dream Thorne had crushed. With her, quietly observing from the back, was Noah, his presence a silent declaration of purpose. Thorne, seated at the head of the imposing mahogany table, smirked, accustomed to dismissing such disruptions. "Miss Carter," he sneered, "this is a private meeting. I believe your Blackwood Farm payment is past due, isn't it?" His voice dripped with condescension, the arrogance of a gatekeeper. "It is," Emily replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in her heart. "Which is why I'm here. Not to beg for an extension, but to rectify a historical injustice that Thorne Agri Ventures is perpetuating." She then unrolled a meticulously researched document, a copy of the original 1872 land deed for Blackwood Farm, a document she had discovered after weeks of relentless digging. "This deed," she announced, her voice echoing in the hushed room, "contains a specific covenant. If Blackwood Farm ever defaults due to external, monopolistic interference designed to devalue its assets, ownership would revert not to the lien holder, but to a trust established for the benefit of local small farmers." Her gaze locked onto Thorne. "Your actions, Mr. Thorne, your market manipulation, your intimidation of local banks, constitute precisely that monopolistic interference. We have compiled irrefutable evidence. I've filed an injunction to seize your assets pending a full investigation into your anti-competitive practices, specifically citing your attempts to acquire Blackwood Farm for a fraction of its true value." A stunned silence descended. Thorne's arrogant facade crumbled. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't bothered with such archaic details, blinded by his own power. Emily had used his own system, his own legalistic framework, to turn the tables. She had found the flaw in his meticulously constructed empire. The legal maneuver, a symmetrical catharsis, used the very land and historical documents he sought to erase, to expose his predatory practices. Later that afternoon, a more personal confrontation awaited. Emily drove Noah to her parents' pristine, white-painted farmhouse. Her father, his hair grayer but his posture still rigid, was in the front yard, pruning rose bushes with meticulous care. He looked up as her car pulled into the gravel driveway, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recognized her. A flicker of surprise, then a hardening of his gaze. Her mother appeared at the screen door, wiping her hands on an apron, her expression tightening into a familiar mask of disapproval. For a moment, the old Emily, the insecure, shamed girl, resurfaced, a tremor of fear running through her. But then she felt Noah's hand slip into hers, his grip surprisingly firm. His silent presence was an anchor, rooting her in her present strength, a symbol of the new legacy. She took a deep breath, the scent of damp soil grounding her. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor she felt inside. "Mother." Her father straightened, his pruning shears clattering softly against the stone birdbath. "Emily," he said, his tone flat, a clear message that she was not welcome. "What are you doing here?" He glanced at Noah, his eyes dismissive, judgmental. "Who is this?" Emily squeezed Noah's hand. She met her father's gaze, her own eyes clear and unwavering. There was no longer any shame in them, only a fierce, protective love. "This is Noah," she announced, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. "He's my son. And this," she gestured to the surrounding fields, "this is not just your farm, but a part of a struggling community that Silas Thorne nearly destroyed." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. A community Veridian Futures is rebuilding. Thorne was also targeting your land, wasn't he? Playing you against your neighbors, waiting for you to falter. A stunned silence descended, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, a silent confession. Her father's face, usually so impassive, now revealed a flash of fear, then disgust. "Your son," he scoffed, his voice laced with the old, familiar condemnation. "And now you champion these newfangled ideas. After all these years, you actually kept that mistake." The word mistake hung in the air, a cruel echo from a painful past. But this time it didn't shatter her. It solidified her resolve. "He is not a mistake, Father," Emily said, her voice rising, filled with a righteous anger that had been simmering for 2 decades. "He is my son, my choice, and the best thing I have ever done. As for newfangled ideas, they saved Blackwood Farm, and they're saving others like it, including farms that Thorne, your esteemed business partner, was circling like a vulture." She stepped forward, pulling Noah slightly in front of her, proudly presenting him not as a secret but as an undeniable truth. Noah, meeting his grandfather's harsh gaze, did not flinch. He stood tall, his chin held high, a quiet strength emanating from him, the embodiment of a new generation's resilience. This was not the frightened child who had once sold water on a street corner. This was a young man, whole and resilient, with a mother who finally claimed him, and a legacy being forged in the heart of the heartland. And so their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old. Their story now belongs to time, but its power only grows if shared. Emily's journey reminds us that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising again, no matter the cost, and that the deepest love will always find its way home. Her triumph over the shadows of her past and the titans of industry proves that even the smallest seed of hope can grow into an unshakable empire. If this journey marked your soul, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence, echoing across the fertile fields of destiny.